Abraham Maslow left the next biggest footprint, or had the most impact in this field. And a lot of you have heard of Abraham Maslow before, maybe from other psychology classes, but also maybe from marketing or some kind of business class, because of his hierarchical theory of needs. Anyway, where we are going with this, we want to start with Abraham Maslow kind of kicking off the ball game when it comes to the study of the most mentally healthy people. Now remember that Rogers really encouraged people to become more fully functioning and experience life more fully. But Abraham Maslow is really going to pull into this idea of be all that you can be, fulfilling your potential. And he has a different term for this. He calls it self-actualized personality. And he made it a goal of his to go out and look for exceptionally mentally healthy people, exceptionally mentally healthy human beings, the most healthy personalities that you could find. In other words, self-actualized human beings, self-actualized people, who were being all that they could be, who had fulfilled their potential. And to give you an idea here, let's go a little bit further with this idea of how he felt about self-actualized people. For one thing, he felt like the drive to become more self-actualized pulls on you through your entire lifetime. This works on your personality through your entire lifetime, whether you respond to it or not. There's a real drive there. And he felt that in order to be at peace with yourself, that you must work with the gifts that you were given to develop those gifts to their fullest potential, or you will not ever achieve peace with yourself. He said, a musician must make music, a scientist must do research, an architect must build, and they all must strive to do this to their fullest potential in order to be at peace with themselves. So this idea here, just to give you an idea of how difficult it was to meet his standard of being a self-actualized person. He estimated, after studying living people who were still living in his time, and also archives of people who had lived before, he estimated that overall only about 2% of people reach self-actualization in their lifetime. Only about 2%. Just to give you a few examples of people you are probably aware of that he felt were self-actualized, reached self-actualization in their lifetime. Eleanor Roosevelt, Thomas Jefferson, James Adams, by the way, that's the first American woman Nobel Peace Prize winner, if you didn't know that. Walt Whitman, most of you know him, but if you don't, he's a famous poet. Gandhi, the Indian political activist, of course, and spiritual leader. And one more example I'll give you, Martin Luther King. So Abraham Maslow talked love. Remember that we said that this need to become more self-actualized or closer to self-actualized works over your entire lifetime. So he was a real proponent of lifetime personality development. And he really concentrated on needs. So remember that when we talk about personality, that we're talking about traits, but we're also talking about preferences and needs. So other ideas like that. And he really focused on needs, And so he's most famous for his hierarchy of needs, And this idea of lifetime personality development based on progressive needs. So kind of climbing a ladder progressively. Let's take a closer look here at his hierarchy of needs. Now, Your book, I think, gives you a smaller hierarchy here that doesn't contain all of these. But I want you to be familiar with each of these levels shown on the slide. And I think the only one you might have difficulty reading is this one in the light blue, and this is cognitive. So we see we got physiological, safety, social, esteem, like self-esteem, cognitive, aesthetic needs, and what do we have here at top? Self-actualization. So you'll see why he has it shaped like a triangle. Is he's saying most people, if you looked at each, if you gave each of these a percentage, and we know that, he would give this top one what percent? Good review question from just a few minutes ago. See if you can answer that without looking in your notes. He would say 2%. Okay? But the one that is going to have the most in it, if you look globally, not in the United States, fortunately, because we are very fortunate within the United States with the resources we have. But he's saying most people are at a physiological level, and then safety, then social. He also said, we're going to go over each of these, don't worry, but he also said that before you can move on to the next need, that you need to satisfy the one below it. Okay? And he felt this very strongly throughout his lifetime. But I do want you to know that a lot of psychologists disagree with that today. They do agree that this is the kind of the normal way that people will go through them. However, sometimes there are reasons why you might skip ahead and move from here to cognitive, for instance, if you go to college, before your social skills are usually developed to the level that you would do so, or before your self-esteem is. Okay? Certainly you can still go to college and work on cognitive needs. Certainly, though, he's not talking about by your parents' choice. That wouldn't put you in this category of working on these needs. That would be by your choice. Okay? But let's start here at the bottom. Physiological needs being like hunger and thirst. So if you think about it, you know, his theory really makes sense of progression, really makes sense when you look at these first two. Because somebody who does not know where the next meal is coming from is not likely to waste time in trying to build a shelter from the elements. In other words, on these safety needs. They're going to be focused on figuring this out first. Okay? And if you think about safety, you know, safety from the environment, from environmental factors, from predators and such, you might think of that as having a roof over your head and maybe even having it paid off, right, before these really become fulfilled. And that becomes secure. Okay? So, but if you think about it in the most minimal way, as far as having a roof over your head, if you are homeless, even if you do know where, you know, you've got some food stocked up for a while, you're probably not going to spend time working on, you know, your social needs of, you know, collecting a group of friends around you and feeling part of that group. Unless that feeds into your safety, unless it's just more limited to safety needs. Okay, so instead you know are going to worry about how you're going to be safe the next time you need to sleep. Are you going to be able to find somewhere that's relatively sheltered and safe from predators? Okay, but once these two are pretty much figured out, okay, people have a tendency to focus on social needs. So we all have a need to belong to a group, to have, you know, close relationships with other people, and to feel their approval and their acceptance and such. Okay, and you know, some people say, "Oh, I don't care what other people think about me, and I don't need anyone." Well, even when people say that, I don't care what anybody thinks about me. That may be true that they think a lot less than, care about that a lot less than other people, but there's still people they admire, there's still friends that they have, and they do have a tendency to really care about what those people think about them, no matter what they might say. It just might be far fewer people than what other people care about. Once those needs are satisfied, people tend to work on their own self-esteem needs. So, how do other people see you? Have you gained their respect? Have you gained a reputation, in maybe your field and such? And then we go to cognitive needs. All of these being necessary in your lifetime to continue being fulfilled. So think about this. Oftentimes we think of cognitive needs just for kids who are in school or in college, okay? But this is a need that will press throughout your lifetime, a need to build your cognitive knowledge and skills, okay? And then aesthetic needs. This is the one that people are less familiar with, but it's a really interesting one because if all of these needs are filled, okay, sometimes this doesn't happen until middle-aged or later in life, but all of these needs are filled. People have a tendency to start developing their aesthetics, appreciation for aesthetics. Students oftentimes have a way of thinking of aesthetics as kind of the upper crust arts. Okay? So things like ballet, things like opera, things that you really oftentimes need to study in order to really develop an appreciation for them. But when you do, and if you do, they really can move you sometimes to the point of tears, okay? At just how amazing they can be. So usually, and I say usually, people have to develop a taste for this, in life, make it a point and develop it, because usually they don't grow up in an environment. But sometimes you might grow up in an environment where you're exposed to this so much that you gain an appreciation for it. If you're really lucky, you grew up in an environment like that and you gained an appreciation at a young age. And then we've got self-actualization at the very top. And here's an interesting question for you. Self-actualized people are not stagnant in their self-actualization. But if they've reached their full potential, what do you think they tend to do then? During that time, they're still living. Okay? And if you guessed correctly, you guessed they are going to be driven to help other people become self-actualized. Okay. All right. I want you now to think about those needs. You can keep your notes out and refer to them. Okay, and think about these needs because I told you that they are used often in marketing. So what I want you to do is to kind of test yourself. Here's an ad that explicitly targets these needs, but it does so in a way that is not right in your face with the text. So oftentimes we'll see that if it's something that marketers are trying to play through your subconscious, they do so using the picture but not the text where it would clearly come through. Okay, so which need is being targeted in this ad? And of course the answer to that is social needs. So here, if you think about it, if they had put it in the text instead, okay, how people would have rebelled, how they would have reacted to this. Because it would have said something like, if you use our hair products, okay, not only will you have a beautiful husband or wife and really beautiful children, exceptionally attractive, but you're all going to be exceptionally happy and close. Look at this picture closely. Okay. Again, really interesting. Okay, now this one actually is right in the text, okay? And this one, if you might have guessed, is which kind of need targeting? And that is targeting cognitive needs. Okay, people don't tend to rebel against those, so there you go. And there's a logical argument here. Look at all this in the small print that you can read if you're really interested and see where they make their argument for their product. And then, how about this one? Which level is this targeting of needs? This is physiological, and I'll tell you, it sure works for me. Okay. Here's a really interesting one. which need does this target? Is a safety, right? But I want you to think about, what if they put this in print? It's very effective as a picture, and it sure draws your attention. Okay, but what if they put in print, what if they said, if you have State Farm insurance, okay, you will not have to worry about things like crocodiles and alligators. What? All right. So much more effective when it's used in a picture in that case. Which need do you think this is targeting? Okay. And if you guessed aesthetic, you are correct. For one thing, there's something very artistic in this picture, and it's the idea of form, just in the picture that was taken, but also the form of dance that's being shown is ballet here. And which need do you think is targeted in this ad? This one is safety again. Now safety from those environmental elements. Okay. What about this one? Okay. And you might say aesthetics here, but you may not, right? You might have said self-actualized. We really don't know, right, whether somebody is self-actualized in this picture. We don't know if they're playing to their absolute full potential, but if they were, that certainly would be a valid answer. And but for now we'll say aesthetics, okay? People who would really go and enjoy this. Okay? And then here's another interesting one. Let's look closely at this. Don't say social. Don't be tempted, because look closer at this picture. Does it look like he's sitting with any of these people? Does he know any of these people? No. Okay? But if you guessed esteem needs, okay, that's what's being targeted as Best Buy tries to get people to want to buy this computer. Look at how everybody else will admire you, right? All right. And here's my favorite one and our last one. Okay, and if you guess social needs, you are correct. That's what that picture is targeting. But I love this ad because it says, no fake smiles, no hidden agendas. Well, we have actors, so we have fake smiles, but no hidden agendas, no bull. I want you to think again, if they put this in print, what they're trying to say to your subconscious with this picture, it would read like this: if you smoke our brand of cigarettes, not only are you going to have a lot of friends, but they are going to be exceptionally attractive, and all of you are going to be exceptionally happy. All right, no bull. Let's finish up with some really interesting, this really interesting idea of Abraham Maslow's, of the peak experience, or peak experiences. Abraham Maslow pointed out, just as you might be thinking to yourself, if only 2% of people are actually self-actualized, what are the odds that you'll ever know what that is like? Okay? And Abraham Maslow pointed out that even though only approximately 2% of people will reach self-actualization in their lifetime, that many people will have these experiences where they experience what it feels like in a small moment of time where they are super engaged in something that is challenging them. They're really engaged and they're super challenged, so at the same time, okay, to the point where they lose all sense, so they're working at their very top potential for that period in their life, okay, in that moment of time, they're working at their top potential, and they're so transcended in this experience that they lose all sense of time and place and who they are, in other words, a self-concept. Okay? This is what he calls a peak experience. Okay? Fortunately, you don't need to know how to spell or even pronounce or even remember this researcher's name. But a researcher called Skizamahali has really done some interesting work on peak experiences more recently. And he found that they are most likely to be experienced in what kind of environment? I want you to think about that for a moment. See if you can guess it. Okay. If you want more time, just pause this videotape. Okay. And the answer to this, believe it or not, is at work. Now, I am guessing that these individuals were not working at Burger King. Okay. But most likely, if you experience peak experiences in your lifetime, hopefully it will be at work, that you will pick a job where you can become that engaged and transcended by what you are doing, at least for moments of time. Okay?